Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm talking about Season 7, Episode 7 of Star Wars The Clone Wars, entitled Dangerous Dead. This is the third episode now in this Ahsoka arc we've been watching on Clone Wars, and we're getting a real taste for what her life has sort of become since leaving the Jedi Order, and a hint at what might be coming up soon with the Mandalorians later in this episode. So let's break it down and take a look. So after Rafa and Trace and Ahsoka have been captured by the Pikes, they're put in a prison cell. The opening shot of this scene is quite funny because we've got the blue Snaggletooth character being drawn away as another prisoner, and those Star Wars fans would remember one of the rarest and earliest of the Star Wars action figures going way back to the 70s was this blue Snaggletooth character before the action figure got changed and everything to become red and suit and shorter and everything than what ended up in the film. But they've had a nice little homage to this action figure at the start of this episode, showing this blue Snaggletooth. So that was a nice little in-joke to see. We then get a scene inside the prison cell where Ahsoka's talking to Trace and Rafa, and they're kind of going through the reason why they kind of distrust or dislike the Jedi. And Ahsoka's obviously being very tight-lipped because she doesn't want to give too much away about her history, but we find out that there's actually a connection to what actually happened in an earlier season of Clone Wars. Trace talks about an early Clone Wars incident that occurred back in Season 1, where Zero the Hutt was busted out of prison by Cad Bane. And she refers to a moment during that event where there was like a speeder chase and Cad Bane had like rescued Zero. The Jedi were there trying to stop them, and there was a crash between a speeder, and rather than crashing into a landing pad with people on it, it crash landed into like a wall, but behind that wall was actually Trace and Raph's apartment, and their parents were unfortunately killed in that crash. Although this scene that Rafa talks about wasn't a direct scene that we actually saw in an earlier episodes of Clone Wars, the events surrounding that were the same one. So I think at the end of that hostage crisis episode back in Season 1, we saw the speeders kind of fly off with Cad Bane and Zero the Hutt and so forth in it. And we're only left to assume what might have happened after that before we go to our subsequent episode. So this little story that Rafa tells Ahsoka kind of fills in the gaps as to what kind of happened after that initial hostage crisis episode back in Season 1. So that was a good little Easter egg to kind of hear about. We also hear Rafa talk about Luminara, who came and apologised and said that she was sorry that her parents got killed. So it was interesting to hear about these little story glimpses of what occurred after that whole bust out of prison with Zero the Hutt way back in Season 1. I think it does a good job of filling out the galaxy. It's like they're referring to events we've seen before and that we're familiar with. So it's kind of a nice little way of bringing this story with Rafa and Trace into the Clone Wars story as a whole by linking it to that early Season 1 episode. It was a nice touch. We then see a scene where Rafa is tortured for some information by one of these torture droids that we kind of first saw back in Return of the Jedi, lowering some heating elements onto like a gonk droid's feet. 8D8, I think, from memory. And I think we may have even seen this 8D8 style torture droid pop up in a few other moments throughout the Clone Wars before, where we see this these little torturing aspects that this droid's obviously been manufactured for. We get an escape scene where Trace, when she's being dragged off to go and be tortured, she manages to escape the Pikes, and Ahsoka and Rafa escape around the same sort of time, with Ahsoka using the Force to open up her prison cell. Ahsoka's really going out of her way in this episode to not be found out to be a former Jedi, because obviously Rafa and Trace have a dislike for the Jedi. They feel they were kind of in some way responsible for their parents' death. And Ahsoka's trying to keep that kind of under wraps because she pretty much knows if she comes out with that sort of information, they're not exactly going to be rapt about it. Although one thing that does kind of surprise me a little bit in this episode is that even though Ahsoka is kind of going out of her way not to give up the game in terms of letting Trace and Rafa know that she's a Jedi, she's obviously relying fairly heavily on her Force powers to get her out of sticky situations. Yet during the course of their escape, there are obviously many Pikes that are taken down, and many guns that are dropped, but Ahsoka chooses throughout the whole course of the episode not to pick up any of the guns that happen to be dropped on the ground. So I kind of felt like, well, if she's trying to evade detection by Trace and Rafa for being a Jedi, then why wouldn't she just pick up a gun and then just, you know, use that the same way that the other two are using it to defend themselves? But that's okay. There's a few sneaky kind of moments where she sort of surreptitiously uses the Force to achieve her goals, but in doing so, trying to make it a little bit on the lowdown so that she's not discovered. And it certainly seems like the Pikes in this episode are about as good a shots as stormtroopers, as they're shooting them like down hallways, and they've got completely clear shots, and not one shot is hitting them. So they've got kind of small faces and little beady eyes, these Pikes. So maybe they have trouble with their blaster aim, I think. Another thing I thought was pretty cool about this episode is if you look at some of the background extras we saw not only at the start with the blue snaggletooth, but there was a few background characters that were right out of the original Star Wars action figure set. So I think we had Walrus Man driving a forklift in the background. We had Greedo in the same green outfit that his action figure appears in the action figure set in the background of one of the scenes. If you look at these guys, it's sort of a nice little in-joke where we kind of see these little action figure characters pop up as extras. It's a nice little touch. So next we get the juiciest little bit of a hint as to what's coming in this episode series, and that's the appearance of 3 Mandalorians. They're wearing hoods and cloaks, and they're sort of trying to hide their Mandalorian armor, and they're watching Ahsoka from a distance. One of them speaks, which is clearly Bo-Katan, who was one of the Mandalorians that have been in several episodes of Clone Wars, was one of the offsiders of Pre Vizsla. She was the sister of Duchess Satine, who was kind of Obi-Wan's girlfriend on Mandalore. Bo-Katan says to her 2 other Mandalorian offsiders, the Mandos have a mission and that Ahsoka could be kind of good use to them, because Bo-Katan references she had met Ahsoka before on Karlak. Karlak refers to a Season 4 Episode 14 of the Clone Wars entitled A Friend in Need, where Ahsoka was on Mandalore. We had Lux Bonteri, and there was some political stuff going on there, and there was the Death Watch. So obviously Ahsoka has crossed paths with Bo-Katan before, and it seems like these Mandalorians are in need of the services of a former Jedi, i.e. Ahsoka. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out in forthcoming episodes, and how Ahsoka gets roped in with the Mandalorians to go and help with a situation there. So I'm guessing that's probably going to play into maybe, as we've seen in the trailers for Season 7, the appearance of Darth Maul and his involvement in, well, both Mandalore and also in the various different crime syndicates of the galaxy. I wonder if there's a connection here to Season 2 of The Mandalorian, since Bo-Katan was the last person that wielded the Darksaber at the end of Star Wars Rebels, and then we see Moff Gideon holding the Darksaber at the end of Season 1 Mandalorian. I wonder whether, now that we know that Ahsoka will be appearing in Season 2 Mandalorian, whether Bo-Katan may appear here as well. So after doing their very best to escape, steal a speeder and try to shoot their way out of there and blast their way onto the ship, they end up getting captured again, and they end up straight back in the prison cell they started in. So they kind of ended up exactly where they began, locked in a holding cell. We do know now that the Mandalorians are on the planet and they want to employ Ahsoka's services, so I'm guessing the Mandos are going to bust out Ahsoka, Trace and Rafa, and probably say, we'll bust you out if you come and help us with our problem on Mandalore. So it'll be interesting to see what plays out in that regard. So we've got 5 episodes left now in the season. I think there's one more to go of this Ahsoka story with Trace and Rafa. I'm really loving what Dave Filoni's doing with Star Wars at the moment. I think Dave Filoni's Star Wars is probably my favourite Star Wars at the moment. I haven't been a massive fan of the the JJ Star Wars or the Rian Johnson Star Wars films, but The Mandalorian I loved, and I've always loved the Clone Wars series as well. So I think Filoni and Favreau have definitely got their act together with Star Wars at the moment more than anybody. So I'll be back next week with my review of Episode 8, which is the last one in the Ahsoka story arc. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out with the Mandos. And in the meantime, guys, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment on this video, and I will see you very soon for my next review.